Hello and welcome back to the channel, everybody. My name is Crypt13, and in today's video I want to help you guys choose your free 4-star character that's coming with the Lantern Rite event. I want to help you guys by rating all of the characters available constellations, so depending on what you have and where you're at in the game, hopefully this is going to help you guys out in choosing who to pick. I won't be talking about the C1s for most of these characters unless it's a really good C1. I'm mostly just going to stick to C2, C4, and C6. So alright, let's go ahead and just jump right into it. We're gonna go ahead and start with Liyue's best little chef here, Xiangling. And Xiangling is very strong, so she is definitely a very high contender for a character that you should pick up. We're gonna go ahead and start with all of her constellations. So starting with C2, the last attack in a normal attack sequence applies the implode status onto the opponent for 2 seconds, in which it will deal 75% of Xiangling's attack as AoE pyro damage. This one is not really that great because Xiangling's best role, as of right now, as of the game's current meta, is to be an off-field damage dealer with her Pyronado. So since this constellation requires you to do a full normal attack combo to work, it's not going to be very useful. So C2 is one of her worst constellations. This one's not worth picking up. If you have your Xiangling at C0, trying to get this one is probably not going to be worth it. You have some better options. C4 increases the pyro duration by 40%. This one is really good. This one's really strong. The initial duration is only 10 seconds, so 40% of this is an extra 4 seconds. Brings it up to 14 seconds. Makes it so that the downtime of this ability is now only 6 seconds versus 10. So that's really solid. And the more duration that you have on this, the better, because that just means you're dealing more damage and then also more elemental reactions. Since this burst has no internal cooldown timer, that's what makes it so good. It's able to just output elemental reactions, and then the damage is just insane because you can either just vaporize every single hit or overload every hit. Right now, one of her best ways to be played is to just vaporize every single one of these hits, giving you an extra 1.5 times damage, multiplicatively. Next up is their C6. It's a really simple one. For the duration of Pyronado, all party members receive a 15% pyro damage bonus. So this is probably her second best constellation after her C4. So you can kind of think of this as a bonus 15% pyro damage bonus. And you know, since it's so far down here at C6, that's what makes it a little bit less good than C4, because you know, C4 is very achievable versus the C6. So although really good, not as good as her C4. So for Xiangling, if you can reach C4, that's really good. And if you have everyone else maxed, or if you don't really care for one of the characters that I'll be talking about, then getting closer to C6 is pretty good. But if your Xiangling's at C0, then there might be some other characters that might be more worth it for you to pick up their constellations. Next, let's go ahead and move on to Xingqiu. Xingqiu is a very strong character. He basically enables almost every pyro DPS character out there in the game. And so picking up constellations for Xingqiu is just going to increase your efficiency with those characters. But Xingqiu does a lot more than just enabling pyro characters, because he's also a great enabler for both freeze and electrocharged comps as well. We're first going to go ahead and start with the C2, going to the C4 and C6. So C2 is going to extend the duration of his rain cutter by 3 seconds, his elemental burst, and then it also decreases the hydro resistance of opponents hit by the sword rain attacks by 15% for 4 seconds. So that 4 seconds might seem low, but you're constantly hitting your opponents with sword rain attacks. So basically this means that the hydro res of your enemies is going to be shredded by 15% during the entire duration of your burst. So pretty powerful here. This just means more damage. This just means more damage. This one's a pretty good one to pick up, but it's not as good as some of his other ones. C4, Evil Soother. Throughout the duration of Rain Cutter, the damage dealt by his elemental skill is increased by 50%. This one's a really good one for one-shot Xingqiu builds, because this is actually a multiplicative multiplier. Very few attacks in this game have multiplicative multipliers. Really only elemental reactions like Melt and Vaporize have that. So the fact that this constellation provides that is also really good. However, again, I don't think this one is his best one. Really good, but I think that his C2 is better than his C4. But then his C6 is really what makes Xingqiu shine like no other character. This pretty much unlocks his full power, increasing his damage, his Hydra application, and his burst efficiency. So if you can C6 your Xingqiu, then his power spikes incredibly. Sacrificial Sword and more refinements on that Sacrificial Sword is going to make your Xingqiu even more powerful because you can generate a ton of particles just, almost instantly. You are able to pop his E skill twice in a row, and this makes it so that his burst almost has 100% uptime. So this means your on-field Pyro DPS character is just able to vaporize consistently and constantly. Characters like Hu Tao, Yanfei, Diluc, all those characters just get super enabled by Xingqiu, and then they are able to be even more enabled once you hit C6. So for Xingqiu, the closer you can get to C6, the better, but since it's C6, it's pretty hard to get. We'll talk about order and priority for these constellations once we go through all the constellations. Alright, Chongyun's C2 is easily one of his best constellations, as most of his other constellations they're just not very good. Reducing cooldown by 15% is pretty massive and increases the speed of your rotations, and so that also means your DPS also increases. For example, if an 80 cost burst was casted in his field, 15% of that would go from 20 seconds down to 17 seconds. 3 seconds might not seem like a lot, but it is really good if you're able to charge up your bursts efficiently. Saving 3 seconds is a lot bigger than you think. Let's go ahead and talk about C4. This constellation is not that great because it only regenerates 1 energy every time he hits an opponent affected by cryo. It can also occur only once every 2 seconds. So 1 energy really isn't that good, and it's not really something you're going to notice when you're in game. This is not really a constellation that you want to seek. His C6 increases his burst damage output by a really good margin. A 4th blade on his burst is solid, but again, it's not as good as his C2 because Chongyun is not really much of a DPS character, although you can play him in that role. His preferred role is to enable other characters, especially through the use of lowering their cooldown with the C2, and also shredding cryo with his E skill, and then also infusing their attacks with cryo. So C6 is good, but if we had to rate it, it would go C2, C6, and then C4. Next up, we got Beidou. Easily, her best constellation is going to be her C2, as it allows her burst to finally deal AoE damage. A limit of 3 enemies, but that's definitely way better than just it hitting 1 enemy. So this is what increases Beidou's damage output significantly, as it effectively triples your damage output, if, of course, there's 3 enemies on the field. This makes Beidou much more useful in matchups where there are multiple enemies. So this constellation is pretty much necessary unless you're going up against a single target. This, of course, is if we're not counting the AoE from a full counter. So without C2, Beidou's AoE is severely lacking. So if you want to be able to use Beidou in most matchups efficiently, you're going to need to pick up her C2. C4 is not very useful for her best position right now, which is a burst support character. Since you aren't really going to be using normal attacks, this additional instance of electro damage is not very useful. However, if you do want to use Beidou as an on-field carry, it has its uses. But again, since it's not really her preferred position, this one doesn't have very many uses. So it's definitely one of her worst constellations. C6, another super solid bonus constellation, which increases your damage output by shredding Electro by 15%. So this one's really good, kind of like Xiangling's C6, but it's not necessary, not as necessary as C2. Also, since it's so far away, that is another reason why this one is really hard to get. So although a pretty nice damage boost, what you really want is Beidou C2. Alright, so now we got Ningguang. Let's go ahead and go over her. Starting with her C2. Her C2 is a really strong constellation. It increases her ability to act as a battery for Geo support. And, Ningguang is commonly played as a burst Geo support character. She does the burst DPS and the battery role pretty well for Geo characters. So this constellation makes it so that she's able to fill that role even better. C4, unfortunately, this constellation's pretty bad right now, from the meta perspective. Defensive skills don't help you clear things any faster, so C4, not that great. C6 increases her burst damage immensely and allows her to do that burst Geo support DPS slot role, even better. I would say not as necessary as her C2, which allows more energy, but between C2 and C6, they're both really good, and it's kind of hard to rate these two. I think they're both really solid constellations. However, I guess since C2 is the earlier constellation, just trying to pick up C2 is what you want to go for. And then if you don't really care about the other characters and you want to get as close to C6 as possible, then going for C6 is not a bad idea. Alright, let's go ahead and talk about Xinyan constellations. First off, you know, Xinyan, she's just not very useful from a meta perspective currently in the game, so can't really recommend Can't really recommend Xinyan's constellations, but let's go through them really quickly. C2, the physical damage of this elemental burst has its crit rate increased to 100% and will always form a shield level 3 when cast. So C2, definitely one of her better constellations for a support role Xinyan. 100% crit rate on your burst means that you can build your Xinyan all in for crit damage. Also giving you a full shield means you can actually have full uptime on her shield finally, because her shield has an insanely high cooldown, 18 seconds, and I believe the duration is only about 12. Let's just double check that. Yep, 12 seconds. So even though it has a really long duration, it's not that strong, so it kind of goes away pretty quickly. So the uptime on the shield is not great. It's really not great. You have a lot of better choices for a shield other than Xinyan. C4 decreases the res whenever you hit opponents with your E skill. 15% res for 12 seconds is actually really long and really good, but since her E skill is such a long cooldown, 18 seconds, that's what makes this not as good. This debuff cannot be applied for 100% time. You know, since Xinyan's not really used in today's meta, I can't really recommend any of these constellations. And then for Xinyan C6, if you ever thought about using her as an on-field carry, you're going to need this constellation because Xinyan's on-field carry playstyle is to use charge attacks. So this one is going to decrease your consumption, your stamina consumption by 30%, and then also give you some extra damage based on her defense. If you've ever wanted to experiment with Xinyan, C6 is kind of what you want to get if you want to play her as a main DPS. Otherwise, no, this is not very recommended. Unless you have everyone max, then you can go ahead and pick this up. Alright, let's go ahead and talk about Yanfei's constellation. I think that this is one of the few characters on this list whose C1 is solid enough to mention. So, you know, if you want to play Yanfei in any capacity as an on-field carry, this is going to make a lot of her stamina issues a little bit less problematic. You're still gonna have some issues, but at least it's a little bit better if you can pick this up. So, you know, if you want to make her playable, I think that her C1 is almost required. Otherwise, that stamina is really, it's not good. It's really cumbersome. So if you've ever wanted to experiment playing Yanfei as an on-field carry, picking up her C1 is very, very important. C2, this is very nice, but it is conditional. Not as conditional as other constellations, and also not as good as their other constellations, but is pretty solid, increasing your crit rate against enemies below 50%. So crit rate's really good for Yanfei because she has a passive that deals an extra instance of damage if you hit a crit. When Yanfei's charge attack deals crit hit to opponents, she'll deal an additional instance of AoE pyro damage equal to 80% of her attack. This is counted as charge attack damage. So that C2 helps this passive skill proc more, and thus, you know, your DPS also goes up. Next, let's talk about C4. When Done Deal is used, her elemental burst, it creates a shield that absorbs up to 45% of Yanfei's max HP for 15 seconds. It absorbs pyro damage more effectively. This allows you to build your Yanfei in a whole new playstyle. Shield Fei allows you to have a very solid shield, and it also allows you to run pyro resonance on some pyro DPS teams. So this one opens up new options for Yanfei, which is really good. 45% of HP, don't sleep on this. This is really good, especially if you build your Yanfei all in for HP, which is how you should build her if you're going for that shield Yanfei playstyle. Throw on that prototype Amber as well, and she can heal, and she just gets more HP. There's no way that your shield can have 100% uptime though, because it only lasts 15 seconds, and your burst is unfortunately a 20-second cooldown. So you will have 5 seconds of downtime on this shield, but it's a pretty strong shield. Arguably, it's stronger than Xinyan's, unfortunately. If you are building Yanfei solely for HP. C6, if you want to main this character, then this is pretty much a must, but otherwise this constellation is not really needed. However, given that Yanfei is mostly played as an on-field carry character, you know, her C6 increases her power a lot. I want to almost say immensely, but maybe I'm getting a little bit too sensational there. This one also completely eliminates her stamina issues. So if you really do like Yanfei's playstyle and want to main her, getting as close to her C6 is going to be important. Otherwise, you don't really need this. All right, next up we have Yunjin. Starting with her C2. After her elemental burst is unleashed, all party members' normal attack damage increased by 15% for 12 seconds. This is probably one of her most solid constellations because getting this normal attack damage bonus increases her flat damage bonus that she gives with her base kit even more potency. So, you know, the more damage bonus you have and the more crit you have on normal attacks means that flat damage bonus gets better, it gets stronger. So this one being such an early constellation is something you definitely want to consider picking up if you plan to use Yunjin. Her C4, this one is pretty solid. 20% defense is not a whole lot though, considering you're already building her for so much defense, but you know, a boost is still a boost. That 15% normal attack damage is going to be a better boost because this 20% defense, really it translates to about 60 or so flat damage, between 60 and 80 flat damage if your Yunjin is at around level 80 Ascension Phase 5. So in my opinion, you know, increasing the normal attack damage of your other party members is going to be better than this. But you know, a boost is still a boost, so this is still really strong. Really strong. C6 will increase your normal attack speed by 12%. This one's also really good because normal attack speed is pretty rare. You don't really find this on very many characters. Chongyun has an 8% attack speed increase, and now Yunjin has 12%. So since those two are support characters, you know, you can kind of combine them and get 20%. Chongyun's 8% isn't really good. So, you know, likewise, 12% is a little bit better, but it's also not that great either. But if you can combine normal attack speed from multiple characters to get a bigger boost, that's when you will probably start seeing more of a difference in your normal attack speed. So although pretty good, C2 is really what you want to go for at the very least. C6 is more of a luxury. Now let's go ahead and talk about the order that you want to prioritize getting these constellations. So from today's perspective on the meta, Xiangling, Xingqiu, and Beidou are the three characters you really want to get their best constellations for. So Xiangling C4 at the very least is definitely what you want to get. Xiangling works on a lot of teams that need a flex spot because her off-field damage is really good, and her best role is creating elemental reactions, especially that Vaporize, since she has no internal cooldown on her burst. For Xingqiu, it's kind of hard since his C6 is his most valuable, so perhaps getting as close to C6 as possible is what you want to get. So an example of a character whose constellations are a little bit earlier that you might want to pick up is Beidou, right? Because Beidou, C2 is really all you need. C6 is a really nice luxury, but the AoE increase from 1 to 3 is really what you need to increase Beidou's efficiency. So if you don't have your Beidou at C2 yet, you really might want to consider picking up Beidou C2. Right, so these three characters are definitely the ones you want to prioritize. And then these next three characters are more of a conditional. We'll talk about Yunjin. So Yunjin is a very conditional character because you should only pick her up if you have characters that are normal attack focused, you know? This means characters like Yoimiya, Razor, Ningguang if you are playing more of a sustained DPS style and not her typical burst DPS style. Eula, you know, if your team has a flex spot, and Child is also pretty normal attack focused. So if you play any of those characters, then attempting to grab her constellation, especially C2, is probably the path that you want to take. If you really main those characters and you already have your Xiangling, your Xingqiu, and your Beidou kind of all set, then, you know, go ahead and grabbing her C4, or maybe even getting closer to her C6 is pretty good. As you know, her C5 is not that great. Her opening flourish is good, but her main value really comes from her elemental burst. Ningguang is also a conditional if you like to play Geo characters or if you want to run a Geo team. So for example, you know, she works in helping Battery, Ito, and Noelle. So if you don't have Albedo or Goro for those characters and you need more energy for your team, Ningguang is a good pickup. And especially grabbing that C2 so that she's able to do that job even better is very good. And then if you want to play your Ningguang as really strong burst DPS style, then going for her C6 is what you want. So that's if you want to go all in on your Ningguang. Otherwise, you know, Ningguang's spot in the meta right now is really just to support Geo characters. Next up is Yanfei, another conditional. So if you really like Yanfei and you want to try a new Pyro DPS, then picking up her Constellations is what you want to do. Shield Fei works great for Pyro DPS characters and allows you to get Pyro Resonance and a pretty decent shield. So characters like Diluc and Hu Tao, Flea, those characters get easy access to the Pyro Resonance, so giving you more attack percent bonus, and then that shield is also pretty nice to keep them a little bit more safe. Otherwise, if you don't really care about, you know, Yanfei or playing her in the main carry slot, there's no reason to go for C6 or anything else. And then lastly, but certainly not leastly, Xinyan is unfortunately dead last here because she's just not seen very much in today's meta. Her shield's just not that great, and unfortunately her pyro application just doesn't match the power of Chongyun. So only go for Xinyan if you have everyone else on this list maxed out. So I am very sorry, Xinyan mains, but don't choose Xinyan as your free 4-star character unless everyone else is already set. So that pretty much covers every character that's going to be available for free in the Lantern Rite event, and hopefully this video helps you make your decision on who to choose. That's the end of this video, everybody. Don't forget to hit that like button. Consider subscribing to the channel, and until next time, I will see you guys later.